had always been the kind of person who made strange decisions. His mother called it impulsive. His friends called it crazy. The galactic community would soon call it something else entirely. The auction house on Station Gamma 7 was not the kind of place respectable beings visited. It sat in the lower rings of the station, where the artificial gravity sometimes flickered, and the air recyclers worked overtime to remove the smell of 100 different species. Neon signs in 17 languages advertised everything from legitimate salvage to items that had definitely fallen off the back of a cargo hauler. Stood in the crowd, his human features drawing occasional glances from the various alien species around him. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 43 years. They were still considered newcomers, primitive even. Most species looked at humans the way humans might look at a child trying to play with adult tools. The auctioneer was a species that resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a very angry accountant. Its compound eyes swept across the crowd as it clicked its mandibles together. "Next item," he announced, its voice translated through the universal translator embedded behind his ear. "Lot number 477. 1 prime excavator miniature class, manufacturer unknown, origin unknown, condition unknown, sold as is, no returns, no complaints, no survival guarantees." A holographic image flickered to life above the auction platform. Felt his heart skip a beat. The ship was beautiful. It was small, barely larger than the old pickup truck his grandfather used to drive back on Earth. Its hull was a deep metallic blue that seemed to shift and shimmer even in the hologram. Strange symbols ran along its sides, characters that even the station's translation systems couldn't identify. The design was unlike anything had ever seen in his 3 years of working as a salvage operator in the Outer Rim. Most excavator ships were ugly, practical things. They were built for one purpose: to dig through asteroids and extract valuable minerals. They looked like flying construction equipment because that's exactly what they were. This ship looked like it had been designed by an artist who happened to also be an engineer. Every curve served a purpose, but every purpose was served beautifully. "Starting bid," the auctioneer continued, 500 galactic credits. Checked his account balance on his wrist display. He had exactly 723 credits to his name. It was everything he had saved over 3 years of work, hauling salvage and scraping mineral deposits off dead rocks in the asteroid belt. No one was bidding. Looked around the crowd. The various aliens were examining their own wrist displays, checking information about the ship. Most of them were frowning, or making whatever expression their species used to indicate displeasure. "Unknown origin," a merchant muttered to his companion. "Could be cursed, could be trapped, could be from the Void Territories." The Void Territories. Had heard the stories. A region of space where ships went in and never came out, where the laws of physics supposedly broke down, where ancient things lived that didn't appreciate visitors. Most humans dismissed these stories as superstition. The galaxy was old, far older than humanity's brief existence, and old civilizations accumulated myths and legends like dust. Not everything the aliens believed was true. 500 credits, called out, raising his hand. Every eye, compound and otherwise, turned to look at him. "The human bids 500 credits, the auctioneer said, something like amusement in its translated voice. "Do I hear 550? Silence. 500 going once. Held his breath. 500 going twice. Still nothing. The crowd was watching him with expressions that ranged from pity to concern. Sold to the human for 500 galactic credits. Felt a mixture of triumph and terror wash over him. He had just spent most of his life savings on a ship that the entire galactic community was apparently afraid to touch. The paperwork, such as it was, took about an hour. Signed digital forms that he barely understood, agreeing to terms that essentially said if the ship killed him, it was his own fault. The auctioneer seemed almost eager to get rid of the vessel, processing the transaction with unusual speed. Dock 773, the auctioneer told him, handing over a small crystalline key. It's been in our storage for 19 standard years. No one wanted it. No one would take it even for free. You are either very brave or very foolish human. Can it be both? Asked. They made a sound that might have been a laugh. With your species, it usually is. Made his way through the station's winding corridors, following the dock numbers painted on the walls. The lower levels of Gamma 7 were a maze of storage facilities, repair bays, and forgotten corners where things ended up when no one wanted them anymore. Dock 773 was at the very end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The lighting panels overhead flickered uncertainly, casting strange shadows on the metal walls. Could hear the distant hum of the station's power systems, a sound that seemed somehow mournful down here in the depths. The dock door was old, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust that suggested no one had visited in a very long time. Pressed the crystalline key against the access panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound of protest, the door slowly slid open. The ship was even more beautiful in person. It sat in the center of the dock, resting on 3 delicate landing legs that shouldn't have been able to support its weight but somehow did. The blue hull seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if it had its own internal illumination. The strange symbols along its sides shifted and moved as approached, rearranging themselves in patterns he couldn't begin to understand. "Hello," said, feeling slightly foolish talking to a ship. "I'm your new owner, I guess." Nothing happened. The ship sat there silent and still. Walked around it slowly, examining every detail. The hull was seamless, without any visible joints or welds. The viewing ports were made of some material that looked like glass, but felt like nothing he had ever touched before, smooth and warm under his fingertips. There didn't appear to be any obvious way to get inside. He tried pressing various parts of the hull, looking for a hidden control or access panel. Nothing worked. He tried speaking commands in English, Galactic Standard, and the 3 other languages he had picked up during his time in space. The ship ignored him completely. "Come on," muttered, pressing his hand flat against the hull in frustration. "Open up. I bought you fair and square." The moment his palm made full contact with the metal, something changed. The symbols on the hull stopped their constant movement. They froze in place, then began to glow with a soft golden light. Tried to pull his hand away, but he couldn't move. It was as if the ship had grabbed hold of him somehow, holding him in place without any visible mechanism. A warmth spread from his palm, traveling up his arm and into his chest. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, like standing in the sun after being in the cold for too long. Felt something in his head, a presence that wasn't his own, examining his thoughts with a clinical precision. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The golden glow faded. Stumbled backward, his hand finally free. A section of the hull that hadn't been there a moment before slid silently open, revealing an entrance ramp that extended down to the dock floor. "Okay," said, his heart pounding in his chest. That was new. He should have been afraid. He should have walked away, reported the ship to the station authorities, let someone else deal with whatever he had just experienced. That would have been the smart thing to do. But had never been accused of being smart. He walked up the ramp and into the ship. The interior was larger than the exterior should have allowed. Had heard of such technology, dimensional folding, but he had never experienced it himself. The common areas of the ship were decorated in the same blue metal as the hull, with soft lighting that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Control panels lined the walls, covered in the same shifting symbols. At the center of the main chamber was a pilot's chair that looked like it had been grown rather than built, its organic curves shaped to support a body. Not a human body, realized. The proportions were wrong, the angles strange. "Well," he said to the empty ship, "I guess I'll just have to make it work." He sat down in the chair, adjusting his position as best he could. It was uncomfortable, but not impossibly so. The armrests had indentations that might have been for claws or tentacles, but rested his hands there anyway. The moment he did, the ship came alive. Screens materialized from thin air, surrounding him with information displays. The symbols that had been incomprehensible before suddenly made sense, as if the ship was translating them directly into his brain. Could understand them now, not through words but through concepts, ideas planted directly into his consciousness. The ship's name was the Wandering Spirit. It was an excavator vessel, designed for mining operations in deep space. It was old, impossibly old, built by a species that had vanished from the galaxy long before humanity's ancestors had climbed down from the trees. And it had been waiting for someone who could activate it. "Why me?" asked aloud. The answer came not in words but in feelings, compatibility, resonance, something in human neural architecture that matched what the ship needed, something that the other species in the auction crowd had lacked. Felt a smile spread across his face. Here he was, a human, a member of a species that the galaxy considered primitive and backward, and he had just bonded with a ship that was more advanced than anything the current civilizations could build. "Okay, Wandering Spirit," he said, gripping the armrests, "show me what you can do." The ship's engines activated with a sound like distant music. Felt the vessel lift off from the dock floor, smooth and easy, as if gravity was merely a suggestion rather than a law. Through the viewing screens, he watched as the dock doors opened ahead of them, revealing the blackness of space beyond. He guided the ship out of the station, using controls that responded to his thoughts as much as his physical inputs. The Wandering Spirit moved through space like nothing he had ever piloted before, quick and agile despite its compact size. Set a course for the asteroid belt where he usually worked. It was familiar territory, and he wanted to test the ship's mining capabilities before venturing anywhere more dangerous. The journey took less than an hour, a trip that would have taken his old shuttle nearly a day. The Wandering Spirit's engines were unlike anything in the galactic catalog, generating thrust through principles that could feel but not fully understand. He brought the ship to a stop near a medium-sized asteroid that he had surveyed before. It was rich in heavy metals, the kind of deposit that would take a normal excavator weeks to process. "All right," said, activating the mining systems. "Let's see what you've got." The Wandering Spirit extended appendages that hadn't even known it possessed. Long, articulated arms unfolded from the hull, each one ending in tools that shifted and changed based on what was needed. A beam of focused energy lanced out, cutting into the asteroid's surface with surgical precision. In less than 15 minutes, the ship had extracted more ore than could have collected in a month with his old equipment. The refined metals were stored in a cargo hold that seemed to expand to accommodate whatever was placed inside it. Laughed out loud, alone in the pilot's chair, surrounded by alien technology that had chosen him out of everyone in the galaxy. "This is amazing," he said. "This is absolutely amazing." He was so focused on the mining operation that he almost didn't notice the sensor alert. The Wandering Spirit's detection systems were far more sensitive than anything had used before. They picked up the approaching vessel when it was still millions of kilometers away, identifying it as a raider ship before could even see it on the visual display. There were pirates, plain and simple. They preyed on independent miners and small cargo haulers, taking everything of value and leaving nothing but debris behind. They were especially fond of targeting humans, who they considered easy prey. Felt a cold knot form in his stomach. His old shuttle wouldn't have stood a chance against a raider. He would have had to run, abandon his cargo, hope that his engines were fast enough to escape. But he wasn't in his old shuttle anymore. "Wandering Spirit," he said, Do you have any defensive systems? The answer came immediately, flooding his mind with information. Yes, the ship had defensive systems. It also had offensive systems. It had weapons that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for millions of years, weapons that they couldn't even imagine. The raider ship was approaching fast, its weapons charging for what the pirates clearly expected to be an easy kill. They probably thought they had found a lost human, someone alone and vulnerable, ripe for the taking. They were wrong. Activated the Wandering Spirit's combat protocols. The ship transformed around him, hull plates shifting to reveal weapons arrays that hummed with contained energy. The targeting systems locked onto the approaching raider with perfect precision. He opened a communication channel. "Attention vessel," said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "This is the mining ship Wandering Spirit. Stand down and withdraw, or I will be forced to defend myself." There was a moment of silence, then a harsh laugh came through the speakers. The captain appeared on his screen, a reptilian face covered in scars and decorated with trophies from past kills. "A human," the captain said, its translated voice dripping with contempt. "In a tiny excavator ship. What are you going to do, little mammal? Dig a hole and hide?" "I'm giving you one chance to leave," replied. "Take it." The captain laughed again. "Kill him," it ordered its crew. "Take whatever's in the cargo hold. We'll sell the human's body to the flesh markets." The raider ship fired. Didn't even have to give the command. The Wandering Spirit responded to his thoughts, to his desire to survive, to his determination not to be a victim. A shield snapped into existence around the ship, absorbing the raider's attack as if it were nothing more than a gentle rain. Then the Wandering Spirit fired back. A single beam of energy lanced across space, striking the raider ship with impossible accuracy. The weapon didn't destroy the vessel outright. It was more surgical than that, more precise. It struck the raider's weapon systems, its engines, its communication array, disabling everything without causing a hull breach. The ship went dark, tumbling slowly through space, helpless. "Open the communication channel again." "That was your one chance," he said. "You didn't take it. Now you can drift here until someone finds you, and you can think about the fact that you were just defeated by a human in an excavator ship." He cut the transmission before the captain could respond and guided the Wandering Spirit away from the disabled raider. His hands were shaking, adrenaline pumping through his system, but he was alive. He was more than alive. He had just stood up to one of the most feared pirate species in the sector and won. As the Wandering Spirit traveled through the asteroid belt, its sensors constantly scanning for new deposits and potential threats, allowed himself to consider the implications of what had happened. He had stumbled upon something extraordinary. A ship that responded to human neural patterns, that chose him out of all the beings who had ignored it in that auction house. The galaxy looked at humans and saw primitive newcomers, children playing at being spacefaring. They underestimated humanity at every turn. Smiled in the pilot's chair of his impossible ship. They had no idea what was coming. The news of the raiders' defeat spread through the station's communication networks faster than light could travel through vacuum. By the time docked the Wandering Spirit back at Gamma 7, everyone knew that a human mining vessel had disabled a pirate ship in single combat. Opinions were divided. Some thought it was a hoax, an exaggeration, the kind of story that grew in the telling. Others thought had simply gotten lucky, that the raiders' weapons had malfunctioned at the crucial moment. A few, those who had seen him leave with the mysterious blue ship from Dock 773, began to wonder if there was more to the story. Sold his ore at the station's refinery, accepting payment that was more than he had earned in the previous 6 months combined. The refinery manager, a weathered who had been processing asteroid minerals for longer than had been alive, examined the refined metals with growing amazement. "These extraction ratios are impossible," the manager said, running the materials through scanner after scanner. The purity levels are beyond anything I've ever seen. What equipment are you using, human? Just some upgraded systems, replied with a shrug. You know how it is, always looking for ways to improve efficiency. The manager gave him a long, hard look but didn't press further. In the salvage and mining business, everyone had their secrets. Spent some of his newfound wealth on supplies, fresh food that would last for weeks in the Wandering Spirits preservation units, spare parts that he probably wouldn't need, but felt better having, information on rich mining territories that hadn't been fully exploited yet. He also purchased something that he had been wanting for months, a high-quality translation matrix that would let him communicate in over 200 galactic languages without relying on the station's systems. As he was leaving the supply store, his purchases loaded onto a hover cart that followed behind him, felt eyes on his back. He turned to see a group of humans gathered near one of the station's observation windows, watching him with expressions of curiosity and hope. Humanity's presence on Gamma 7 was small, maybe 50 individuals total, most of them working low-level jobs that the other species didn't want. They were dock workers and waste processors, maintenance technicians and cargo handlers. They survived, but they didn't thrive. Walked over to them. You're the one, a young woman said, her accent marking her as someone from the North American continent back on Earth. The one who took down the raider. Word travels fast, replied. Is it true? An older man asked. He had the weathered look of someone who had spent too many years in artificial light, breathing recycled air. Did you really disable a pirate ship with an excavator? Considered his response carefully. He could downplay what had happened, dismiss it as luck or exaggeration. That would be the safe choice, but safety had never been his priority. It's true, he said, and it's just the beginning. The humans exchanged glances, something shifting in their expressions. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but recognized it immediately. It was hope. How, the young woman asked, how is that possible? Because they underestimate us, said. Every species in this galaxy looks at humans and sees primitives. They see newcomers who haven't learned their place yet. They see easy targets. He paused, letting his words sink in. They're wrong, and I'm going to prove it. The older man shook his head. Big words, son. The galaxy doesn't change because one human gets lucky. Then I'll have to be lucky more than once, replied. He left them there, pushing his hover cart toward the dock where the wandering spirit waited. But as he walked, he felt their eyes on his back, felt their thoughts following him. The seed had been planted. That night, alone in his ship, explored the wandering spirit's databases. The vessel's memory systems contained more information than all of Earth's libraries combined, stored in formats that human computers couldn't even recognize, let alone read. But through his bond with the ship, could access fragments of it, pieces that the wandering spirit translated into concepts he could understand. The ship's builders were called something that translated roughly as the architects. They had existed millions of years ago, one of the first truly advanced civilizations to arise in the galaxy. They had built wonders that current species couldn't comprehend, traveled to places that modern explorers couldn't even find. And then, for reasons that even the wandering spirit didn't fully understand, they had vanished. Not died out, not destroyed, but vanished. They had left the galaxy, moved on to something else, somewhere else. Their civilization had reached a point where physical existence in normal space was no longer necessary or desirable. But before they left, they had hidden caches of their technology throughout the galaxy. Ships like the Wandering Spirit, tools and devices and knowledge, waiting for beings who might be capable of using them. The catch was that the architect's technology was keyed to specific neural patterns. It wouldn't respond to just anyone. Most species in the galaxy lacked whatever quality the architects had been looking for. Humans, it seemed, had that quality. Sat in the pilot's chair for a long time, staring at the stars through the wandering spirits' viewing screens. Out there, scattered across the galaxy, were more caches of architect technology, ships that might make the wandering spirit look like a toy, weapons that could reshape the balance of power among the galactic civilizations, knowledge that could advance humanity by thousands of years overnight. And only humans could access them. "Well," said to his ship, to the stars, to whatever might be listening, "I guess I know what I'm doing next." He began to plan. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Mined asteroid after asteroid, accumulating wealth at a pace that would have been impossible with any other vessel. He reinvested his profits into information, bribing station officials and trading with information brokers to learn everything he could about rumors of ancient technology, unusual discoveries, unexplained phenomena. He also began to recruit. The human population of Gamma 7 had written him off as crazy at first, but as his bank account grew and his reputation spread, they began to listen. The young woman from the observation window, whose name was Sarah, became his first convert. She had technical skills, a background in systems engineering that she had never been able to put to use in the limited jobs available to humans on the station. The older man, Thomas, joined a week later. He had been a ship captain back on Earth before the contact, before humanity had learned how small they were in the vast community of intelligent life. He knew space, knew how to navigate and negotiate and survive. Others followed, engineers and pilots, scientists and soldiers, humans who had come to the stars hopping to find opportunity and found only discrimination instead. They gathered around in his impossible ship, drawn by his success and his vision. "We're going to change things," told them, gathered in a rented meeting room deep in the station's lower levels. "The galaxy looks at us and sees primitives, but we have something they don't even know about. We have compatibility with technology that makes everything they've built look like stone tools." "One ship," Thomas pointed out. "Even an amazing ship is still just one ship." "For now," replied, "but there are more. Caches of ancient technology scattered throughout the galaxy, waiting for beings who can use them, and we can use them. Humans can use them." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "You want to find more of these ships?" "I want to find everything," said. "Ships, weapons, knowledge. I want to make humanity a force that the galaxy can't ignore anymore, and I want you all to help me do it." The room was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, hands began to rise, agreement spreading like fire through dry grass. Felt the wandering spirit in his mind, a constant presence now, watching through his eyes. The ship approved, he realized. Whatever the architects had wanted when they left their technology behind, this was part of it. Humanity was about to wake up. The first expedition beyond Gamma 7's local space was planned for 3 days later. Had identified a potential cache location based on old survey data and rumors from the station's information networks. It was in a remote system, several jumps from any major trading routes, the kind of place that most ships avoided because there was nothing there worth the fuel to reach it. The night before departure, stood on the wandering spirit's observation deck, watching the stars. Sarah joined him, her footsteps soft on the ship's organic floor. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "No," replied. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A month ago, I was barely scraping by, hauling salvage for a few credits at a time. Now I'm planning expeditions to find ancient alien technology with a crew of true believers." Sarah laughed. "When you put it that way, it does sound a little crazy." "It is crazy," admitted. "But it's also real. This ship is real, the technology is real, and what we're about to do will be real too." "The other species won't like it," Sarah said. "When they figure out what we found, what we're capable of, they'll try to stop us." "I know. They have fleets, armies, political power that we can't even imagine." "I know," said again. "And we're going to challenge all of that with an excavator ship, and a handful of desperate humans. Turned to look at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The raider captain probably said something similar right before I disabled his ship. It didn't work out too well for him. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she smiled too. Fair point. They stood together in silence, watching the stars wheel past as the station rotated slowly in the void. Tomorrow, the next chapter would begin. Tomorrow, humanity's place in the galaxy would start to change. But tonight there was peace. The departure from Gamma 7 was unremarkable, just another ship leaving the station among hundreds of others. No one paid particular attention to the small blue vessel that slipped out of Dock 773, its crew of 6 humans settling into quarters that had been designed for beings nothing like them. Guided the wandering spirit through the departure lanes, following station traffic controls instructions with perfect compliance. There was no need to draw attention, not yet. The time for spectacle would come later. Once they were clear of the station's controlled space, engaged the ship's primary drive systems. The wandering spirit leaped forward, accelerating at rates that would have killed the crew of any conventional vessel. The internal gravity systems compensated perfectly, keeping everyone comfortable even as the ship pushed the boundaries of physics. First jump point in 17 minutes, Sarah reported from her station. The ship's interface had adapted to her neural patterns as well, though not as completely as it had to. She could read the displays and operate basic systems, but the deep bond that shared with the vessel was unique to him. "Everyone strapped in?" asked. Confirmations came from around the ship. Thomas in the navigation pod, tracking their course through the stars. Doctor, no relation to, monitoring the ship's systems for any signs of trouble, and in the cargo bay, preparing the equipment they would need once they reached their destination. "Then let's see what's waiting for us," said, and the wandering spirit jumped. Space folded around them, dimensions collapsing and expanding in ways that human mathematics was only beginning to describe. The stars outside the viewing ports blurred into lines of light, then into patterns that hurt to look at, then into nothing at all. For a timeless moment, the ship existed outside normal space, traveling through something that the architects had understood and humanity had barely imagined. Then they emerged, light years from where they had started, floating in the darkness between stars. "Navigation confirms position," Thomas reported. "We're in the target system. Sensors are picking up the 4th planet in the system. Preliminary scans show no signs of current habitation." "But there's something else," Sarah added, her voice tight with excitement. "The ship's detecting a structure on the planet's surface. Large metallic signature, similar composition to the wandering spirit's hull." Felt his heart rate increase. This was it. Either they had found what they were looking for, or they had traveled halfway across the sector for nothing. "Take us in," he ordered. "Let's see what the architects left behind." The wandering spirit descended through the planet's thin atmosphere, its sensors mapping the terrain below. The world was barren, a rocky wasteland that had never developed life, its surface marked by ancient meteor impacts and geological upheavals. The structure they had detected sat in the center of a massive crater, half buried in rock and dust, waiting. As they drew closer, felt the familiar warmth of the ship's bond intensify. The wandering spirit was excited, if such a word could be applied to a vessel. It recognized something in the structure below, something that resonated with its own ancient programming. "Beginning landing sequence," announced. The ship touched down on the crater floor, its landing legs sinking slightly into the loose dust. Through the viewing ports, the structure loomed ahead of them, a massive complex of blue-black metal that seemed to drink in the pale sunlight rather than reflect it. "Life signs?" asked. "None detected," Doctor replied. "The structure appears to be completely inactive. No power readings, no electromagnetic emissions, nothing." "Same as the wandering spirit before I activated it," murmured. "It's waiting, waiting for the right person." He stood from the pilot's chair, his decision already made. I'm going in. Everyone else stays with the ship. Sarah started to protest. This is why we came, he said. The technology won't respond to just anyone. If I don't try to activate it, we've come all this way for nothing. No one argued, though he could see the concern in their faces. They had come too far to turn back now. Suited up in environmental gear, checking and double-checking his oxygen supply and communication equipment. The planet's atmosphere wasn't breathable, thin and cold, and laced with toxic compounds. Even with the wandering spirit's advanced technology, he would have to be careful. The airlock cycled open and stepped out onto the surface of an alien world. The ground crunched under his boots, a mixture of rock and ancient dust that had lain undisturbed for millions of years. He walked toward the structure, his breath loud in his helmet, his heart pounding against his ribs. The entrance was massive, designed for beings much larger than humans. But as approached, a smaller door irised open in the lower portion of the wall, sized almost perfectly for his frame. The structure was responding to his presence, adapting to his needs. He stepped inside, and the darkness swallowed him whole. For a moment there was nothing. No light, no sound, no sense of space or dimension. Floated in void, suspended between heartbeats, waiting. Then the lights came on, and saw what the architects had left behind. The chamber was vast, stretching upward and outward beyond what his helmet's lights could illuminate. Ships filled the space, hundreds of them, vessels of every size and configuration, from scout craft barely larger than the wandering spirit to massive carriers that could have swallowed space stations whole. They hung in the air without visible support, preserved in perfect stasis, waiting for the signal to awaken. But that wasn't what caught attention. That wasn't what made him fall to his knees on the ancient floor, tears streaming down his face inside his helmet. In the center of the chamber, raised on a platform of glowing crystal, was something impossible. A gateway, a tear in the fabric of reality itself, showing a view of somewhere else. A place of swirling colors and impossible geometries, where shapes moved that human eyes couldn't fully process. And standing in front of the gateway, frozen in the same stasis as the ships, was a being that could only be one of the architects themselves. It was beautiful in a way that transcended species or culture or biology. It was ancient, older than stars, older than the elements that made up human bodies. And it was looking at where would be, its gaze fixed on the entrance as if it had known, millions of years ago, exactly when he would arrive. "Welcome," a voice said in its mind, speaking without sound, communicating without words. "We have been waiting for you." And standing in that chamber of impossibilities, surrounded by power beyond imagination, Earth began to understand just how different the galaxy was about to become. The architect did not move. It could not move. But its consciousness was vast, stretching across dimensions that could barely perceive, and it spoke to him with a patience that spanned geological ages. "Your species is young," the voice continued in his mind, each concept arriving fully formed rather than as words. "You have existed for less than a heartbeat in cosmic terms, yet you carry within you something precious. Something we placed there long ago, in the genetic substrate of the ancestors who would one day become you." Struggled to find his voice. "You made us, you created humans." "Not created," the architect clarified. "Adjusted, modified. Your world was one of thousands we visited during our exploration of this galaxy. Life was emerging there, climbing toward consciousness. We saw potential in your evolutionary line, and we made small changes, alterations that would bear fruit millions of years in the future." The chamber seemed to pulse around, the ships overhead stirring slightly, as if sensing his presence. The gateway behind the architect swirled with colors that had no names in any human language. "Why?" asked. "Why would you do that? Why leave all of this behind?" The architect's form flickered, its non-presence somehow conveying amusement. Because existence is long, young one. Because we could not take everything with us when we transcended this reality. Because we knew that someday, beings would arise who could use what we left behind, and we wanted them to be worthy. The other species, said slowly, the pieces coming together in his mind. All of them, they can't use your technology. They are what they evolved to be, the architect replied. Natural developments unguided by external influence. Their minds are structured differently, their consciousness operates on incompatible frequencies. They can observe our works, study them, even worship them. But they cannot activate them. They cannot bond with them. Only those we prepared can do that. Looked around at the fleet of ancient ships, at the unimaginable power waiting to be claimed. There must have been others, other species you modified. Yes, 12 scattered across this galaxy, each seeded with the potential to reach for the stars. But evolution is unpredictable and civilizations are fragile. Wars claimed some. Natural disasters took others. A few simply chose paths that led away from space, turning inward rather than outward. The architect's attention seemed to intensify, focusing on with renewed interest. Humanity is the last, the final inheritors. If your species cannot rise to claim what we have left, our legacy will remain dormant until entropy claims it, unused and purposeless. The weight of those words settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. Not just his future, not just humanity's future, but the purpose of an ancient civilization rested on what he did next. I'm just one person, he said, a salvage worker from a backwater planet. How am I supposed to live up to something like that? You already have, the architect replied. You found the wandering spirit. You bonded with it, activated it, used it to defend yourself against those who would prey upon you. You gathered others around you, humans who share your vision. You came here seeking more. The frozen form before him seemed to shimmer, becoming less substantial somehow, as if the architect was preparing to complete some long-delayed journey. I am only an echo, the voice continued. A message left behind, awaiting the arrival of an inheritor. My true self departed this reality before your ancestors walked upright. But I was given the authority to unlock this cache for whoever proved worthy of finding it. Energy pulsed through the chamber. The ships overhead began to glow, systems activating for the first time in millions of years. The gateway behind the architect expanded, its swirling depths becoming clearer, more defined. Everything here is yours now of Earth. The ships, the weapons, the knowledge stored in these halls. But be warned. The galaxy will not accept your rise quietly. The species who have ruled will see you as a threat, an upset to their carefully balanced order. They will try to stop you, to destroy you, to take what you have found. Let them try, heard himself say. The architect's echo made a sound that might have been laughter. Yes, that spirit, that defiance, that is why we chose your kind. That is why you will succeed where others failed. The form began to dissolve, breaking apart into particles of light that drifted toward the gateway. One final gift, the voice said, growing distant. Through the gateway you will find more than technology. You will find knowledge. The history of our civilization, our understanding of the universe, everything we learned in our billions of years of existence. It waits for you whenever you are ready to claim it. And then the architect was gone, leaving alone in a chamber full of impossible treasures. He stood there for a long time, processing what had happened, trying to comprehend the scale of what had been entrusted to him. Then slowly, he raised his communication device. To Wandering Spirit, he said, you all need to get in here right now. The response was immediate, his crew racing across the crater floor to join him in the chamber. When they entered, when they saw what waited inside, the reactions ranged from stunned silence to outright tears. This changes everything, Sarah whispered, staring up at the fleet of ancient ships. This changes absolutely everything. Yes, agreed, it does. Thomas walked between the rows of dormant vessels, his experienced eye cataloging capabilities and configurations. These designs, some of these ships are built for combat, heavy armor, weapon emplacements. This isn't just a mining cache. This is a battle fleet. The architects knew that their inheritors would need to defend themselves, said. They prepared for that. Doctor had found a terminal of some kind, a control interface that responded to her touch with flowing displays of information. There's a database here, millions of years of accumulated knowledge. I can barely understand the indexing system, but I can see references to physics, biology, engineering, technologies we haven't even imagined yet. How do we activate the ships? Asked Ever Practical. The wandering spirit bonded with, do these work the same way? Closed his eyes, reaching out through his bond with his own ship, extending his consciousness toward the dormant fleet. He felt them respond, felt dozens of artificial intelligences stirring from their long sleep, recognizing him as the one they had been waiting for. They'll respond to any human, he said, opening his eyes. The architects designed them that way. The bond won't be as deep as what I have with the wandering spirit, but they'll obey human commands. They'll work for us. Looked around at the 5 other humans in the chamber, then up at the hundreds of ships above. That's a bit of a manpower problem. We've got 5 pilots and enough ships to fight a war. Then we need more humans, Sarah said, the implications clearly racing through her mind. We need to go back, not just to Gamma 7 but to Earth. We need to tell people what we've found. We need to recruit. Nodded slowly. That was always the plan. This just accelerates it. They spent 3 days in the cache, exploring its depths, activating systems, cataloging what they had found. The fleet contained 47 combat vessels of various sizes, from single-pilot fighters to a massive cruiser that could serve as a mobile base of operations. There were support ships as well, cargo haulers and repair vessels and science platforms, everything needed to establish and maintain an independent spacefaring force. The knowledge database was even more overwhelming. Doctor estimated that it would take years, maybe decades, to fully translate and understand everything stored there. But even the fragments she could access in those 3 days revealed technologies that made current galactic science look primitive. Clean energy systems that could power cities for, medical advances that could extend human indefinitely, communications methods that operated outside normal space, allowing instantaneous contact across any distance, manufacturing techniques that could turn raw materials into finished products at the molecular level. This isn't just enough to catch up with the other species, Doctor said, her voice hushed with awe. This is enough to leap past them, 1,000 years past them, maybe more. Listened to her reports, watched his crew explore and discover and grow more excited with each passing hour. But part of his mind remained fixed on the gateway, the tier in reality that still swirled at the center of the chamber. The architect had said there was more through there. More knowledge, more power, more secrets to claim. But something about the gateway made hesitate. It felt like a threshold that, once crossed, could not be uncrossed. A door that opened onto something he wasn't ready to see. Soon, he told himself, not yet but soon. On the 4th day, they made their selection. Would pilot the Wandering Spirit, which had proven to be the most versatile of the smaller vessels. Sarah would command the cruiser, which they had named the Rising Dawn after a brief debate. Thomas and the others would each take one of the combat ships, forming a small but formidable squadron. The remaining vessels would stay in the cache, awaiting future crews. Sealed the facility with his own neural signature, ensuring that only humans could open it again. The journey back to Gamma 7 was faster with multiple ships sharing sensor data and navigation calculations. The fleet emerged from their final jump point just outside the station's controlled space, 5 architect vessels where one had left weeks before. Station traffic control went absolutely insane. Unidentified vessels, halt immediately. You are in violation of approach protocols. Identify yourselves or face defensive action. Opened a channel, unable to keep the smile out of his voice. Gamma 7 Control, this is aboard the Wandering Spirit, requesting permission to dock. A long pause, then a different voice higher-pitched with barely controlled panic. The human salvage operator, you left alone, you left with one ship. Circumstances changed, replied. I'm requesting dock space for 5 vessels. We have cargo to offload and business to conduct. Another pause, longer this time. Could imagine the chaos in the traffic control center, operators frantically checking their sensors, supervisors demanding explanations that no one could provide. Wandering Spirit, you are cleared for approach. Docks have been assigned to bays 17 through 21. Please maintain formation and follow beacon guidance. Acknowledged. Control. Wandering Spirit and escort proceeding to assigned docks. They flew through the controlled space in perfect formation, the architect's ships moving with a precision that no current galactic technology could match. Other vessels in the shipping lanes stopped what they were doing to watch. Their crews pressed against viewing ports, trying to understand what they were seeing. Humans, in ships that shouldn't exist, flying through Gamma 7 like they owned the place. The docking procedures took hours, complicated by the fact that the Rising Dawn was too large for any standard bay and had to be secured to an external anchor point instead. By the time all 5 ships were properly moored, a crowd had gathered on the observation decks overlooking the dock levels. Stepped off the Wandering Spirit to find himself facing what looked like half the station's population. Pirates who had heard about his defeat of their brethren. Merchants trying to calculate the trade value of what he had brought. Officials demanding to know how he had acquired military-class vessels. And humans, dozens of them, staring at him with expressions of disbelief and dawning hope. I am Station Administrator, or, announced, pushing through the crowd. She was tall for her species, adorned with the ceremonial scarves that indicated her rank. You will explain what is happening here, human. Where did you obtain these ships? What is your purpose? Looked at her, then at the crowd, then at his crew gathered behind him. This was the moment, the point of no return. Administrator, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the dock. I have discovered technology from an ancient civilization. Technology that responds to human neural patterns. Technology that makes everything the current galactic community has built look like toys. Murmurs ran through the crowd. The administrator's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion. These ships are just the beginning, continued. There are more, many more, and the knowledge to build better ones, to advance humanity past every other species in this galaxy. We are not primitives. We are not newcomers to be patronized and exploited. We are the inheritors of a civilization so advanced that it chose to leave this reality entirely. Impossible, a voice shouted from the crowd. Humans are barely evolved. Their planet didn't even develop space travel until a few decades ago. And yet here I stand, replied, with ships that make your raiders look like garbage scows. Here I stand with technology that your scientists can't even understand, let alone replicate. Here I stand, offering humanity a chance to claim its rightful place in this galaxy. He turned to the human members of the crowd, speaking directly to them now. Come with me, join us. There are ships waiting for pilots, technology waiting to be unlocked, a future waiting to be claimed. Everything you've been, everything you've dreamed of, it's all possible now, but only if we're willing to reach out and take it. The administrator was shouting something, demanding order, threatening consequences. They were fingering their weapons, clearly considering whether a preemptive strike might be the smart move. But the humans in the crowd were moving forward, pushing through the alien bodies, reaching toward with questions and hopes and a hunger that had been building for 43 years. I'm in, a young man said, his accent marking him as someone from the Earth's eastern continents. Whatever you're doing, I'm in. Me too, a woman added, her arm bearing the scars of industrial accidents common among human dock workers. More voices, more volunteers. Within an hour had recruited 37 new crew members, humans from every background and circumstance who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. The administrator tried to stop them. She threatened legal action, impoundment of the ships, expulsion from the station. But when her security forces moved to block the humans' path to the docks, they found themselves facing the weapons of 5 architect vessels, all of them powered up and ready to fire. I would strongly recommend, said calmly, that you allow my people to leave. We have no quarrel with this station. We have no interest in starting a conflict, but we will not be stopped. Not by you, not by anyone. The administrator backed down. She had no choice. Her security forces might have outnumbered crew, but their weapons were toys compared to what the architect ships could unleash. A single battle would destroy the station and everyone on it. This isn't over, she hissed. The Galactic Council will hear of this. Every major power in the sector will know what you found. They will not allow humans to upset the balance. Good, replied. Let them know, let them all know. Let them understand that the rules have changed. The convoy departed Gamma 7 with 42 humans aboard, more than half of them untrained volunteers who barely knew how to operate their environmental suits. It was a ragged start, but it was a start nonetheless. On the bridge of the rising dawn, Sarah coordinated the fleet's movements while stood at a viewport, watching the station dwindle behind them. Where do we go now? She asked. Earth, replied. We need more people, more pilots, more scientists and engineers. We need to build something that can stand against whatever the galaxy throws at us. That's going to be complicated, Thomas observed from his tactical station. Earth is technically under Galactic Council jurisdiction. The treaty our government signed after first contact gave them oversight of human space activities. The treaty our government signed when they didn't know any better, corrected. When they thought they had to accept whatever terms the aliens offered or be left behind. That treaty is void the moment we have the power to void it. He turned to face his crew, the humans who had trusted him enough to leave everything behind for an uncertain future. This is just the beginning, he said. The cache I found has enough ships to start a fleet, but the architects seeded technology throughout this galaxy. More caches, more ships, more knowledge. And somewhere out there through the gateway there's even more, things we can't even imagine yet. The other species won't sit idle while we gather power, Sarah pointed out. No, agreed. They'll try to stop us. They'll form alliances, build weapons, do everything they can to put us back in what they see as our place. But they're operating from fear and we're operating from purpose. They're trying to preserve the old order and we're building a new one. Doctor looked up from her data terminal. I've been analyzing the information from the cache. The architects left detailed records of the species they modified, including genetic markers that identify individuals with stronger compatibility. If we could find a way to test for these markers, we could identify the humans most likely to form deep bonds with the technology. Potential commanders, Thomas said, understanding immediately. People who could bond with ships the way bonded with the wandering spirit. Exactly. And the deeper the bond, the more effectively the technology works. A fully bonded human could potentially access capabilities that we haven't even discovered yet. Felt a chill run down his spine. He had always assumed his connection to the wandering spirit was unique, a quirk of his particular brain chemistry. But if what Doctor was suggesting was true, if some humans could bond even more strongly than he had, the implications were staggering. Add it to the list, he said. Find those people, recruit them, train them. We're going to need every advantage we can get. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks, even with the architect ship's superior speed. They had to be careful, avoiding major shipping lanes and settlements where they might be spotted. Word of their activities at Gamma 7 had spread through the galactic communication networks, and there were already reports of ships being dispatched to intercept them. They had assembled a hunting fleet, eager to avenge their humiliation and claim the technology for themselves. The trading consortium had placed a bounty on his head large enough to tempt even legitimate bounty hunters. The Empire had declared him a threat to galactic stability and called for his immediate capture. Only the Galactic Council itself remained silent, but that silence was more ominous than any declaration would have been. The Council was ancient and patient. They were probably waiting, gathering information, deciding how to respond to this unprecedented situation. Use the time to train his new recruits, turning untested volunteers into something resembling a crew. They practiced with the architect systems, learning to interpret the neural interfaces and respond to ship commands. Some took to it naturally, their minds adapting quickly to the alien technology. Others struggled, requiring weeks of practice to achieve basic proficiency. But all of them improved, all of them grew, and by the time Earth came into view on the long-range sensors, had the beginnings of a real fleet, not just ships but people who knew how to use them. Earth hung in space before them, blue and green and white, heartbreakingly beautiful against the endless black. Hadn't been home in over 4 years, hadn't seen his family or walked on solid ground under an open sky. The sight of it stirred emotions he thought he had buried. "There are Council patrol ships in orbit," Thomas reported. "At least a dozen. They're probably here to monitor human space traffic, but they'll definitely notice us." "Let them notice," said. "We're not here to hide, we're here to recruit." The convoy approached Earth openly, broadcasting their identification codes and requesting permission to enter human-controlled space. The Council ships scrambled in response, their commanders clearly uncertain how to handle vessels that didn't match any known configuration. "Unknown ships, halt immediately and submit to inspection. By authority of the Galactic Council, you are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare for boarding." Opened a channel, making sure his transmission was wideband, capable of being received by every communication system in the region. "This is Commanding Officer of the human vessel Rising Dawn. These ships are property of the human race, recovered from an ancient cache left by a predecessor civilization. We are not subject to Galactic Council jurisdiction. We are returning to speak with our people. You have no authority to make such claims. Human space activities are regulated by treaty. You will comply with Council directives or face military action." The Council ships were moving into an intercept formation, their weapons systems coming online. They outnumbered S's fleet, and their commanders probably thought they had the advantage. They were wrong. "Weapons hot," Sarah announced from the Rising Dawn's tactical center. "Targets locked on all Council vessels, ready to fire on your command." Watched the approaching ships, calculating trajectories and outcomes. He didn't want to fight, not here, not like this, but he wouldn't back down either. "Council vessels," he said, "I am going to transmit to you some sensor data. I strongly suggest you examine it before taking any hostile action." He sent the data, detailed scans of the Rising Dawn's capabilities, its weapons, its shields, its speed. He showed them exactly what they were facing, exactly how outmatched they were. The Council formation hesitated. Could imagine the commanders staring at their displays, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they thought they knew about human technology. "This has to be a trick," one of the Council ships transmitted. "Humans don't have this capability." "We do now," replied. "And there's more where this came from, much more. You can fight us and lose, or you can stand down and let us pass. Those are your only options." A long, tense moment. Then, slowly, the Council ships began to pull back, moving out of the convoy's path while maintaining a cautious distance. "We will report this to the Council," the lead ship transmitted. "There will be consequences." "I'm counting on it," said. Tell your masters everything. Tell them that humanity has claimed its inheritance. Tell them that the order they built is about to change." The convoy passed through the council formation, without a shot being fired, and continued on toward Earth. The news of their arrival spread faster than their ships could travel. By the time they reached orbit, the planet below was in an uproar. Governments were holding emergency sessions. News networks were running constant coverage. Ordinary people were looking up at the sky, wondering what the strange ships meant for their future. Began broadcasting immediately, speaking not to governments or officials, but directly to the people of Earth. "My name is. I was born in San Francisco in the United States. 4 years ago, I left Earth to find work in the outer systems, like thousands of other humans who found that our place in the galaxy was limited to the jobs that other species didn't want." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I found something out there. Technology from an ancient civilization that chose humanity as their inheritors, ships that respond to human minds, knowledge that can advance our species by, power that the rest of the galaxy can't match." The viewing numbers on his broadcast were climbing exponentially, billions of people tuning in from every corner of the planet. "I'm not asking permission from the governments that signed away our sovereignty. I'm not requesting approval from the Galactic Council that treats us like children. I'm speaking directly to you, the people of Earth, because this choice belongs to all of us." He spread his arms, encompassing the bridge around him, the fleet beyond. "Join us. Help us build something that will secure humanity's future among the stars. Pilots, engineers, scientists, teachers, anyone who believes that we deserve better than what the galaxy has offered us. Come to us. We have ships. We have technology. What we need is people." He ended the transmission and waited. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, shuttles began launching from every continent, carrying volunteers who had watched his broadcast and made their decision. Some came from military backgrounds, trained pilots and soldiers who saw a chance to serve a greater cause. Others were scientists and researchers, drawn by the promise of ancient knowledge waiting to be unlocked. Many were ordinary people, workers and families, who simply wanted more than the limited future the galactic community had planned for them. Earth's governments tried to stop the exodus, citing treaties and regulations and international law. But the tide was too strong, the desire for something better too powerful. When military forces attempted to block shuttle launches, crowds of civilians overwhelmed them with sheer numbers. When air traffic control refused to clear departures, pilots took off anyway, trusting their lives to fleet. In 3 days, over 50,000 people had joined the cause. Organized them as best he could, distributing them across the ships in the fleet, assigning roles based on skills and aptitudes. The volunteers were untrained and undisciplined, but they were eager, and they were determined. They would learn. The Galactic Council finally broke its silence. The transmission came through every channel simultaneously, overriding normal communications protocols with the authority that only the Council possessed. A composite image appeared, representing the 5 species that dominated the current galactic order. And the. Their forms were different, their origins scattered across 1,000 light years, but their message was unified. To the human known as and all who follow him, the Galactic Council has deliberated on your actions and reached a decision. Your claims regarding ancient technology are noted. Your violation of established treaties is condemned. Your recruitment of human civilians constitutes a direct threat to galactic stability. The composite image shifted, emphasizing the military might each species commanded. You have 30 standard days to surrender yourself and your vessels to Council authority. All recruited civilians will be returned to Earth. All recovered technology will be confiscated and studied by Council scientists. If you comply, you will face trial for treaty violations but may avoid more severe consequences. A pause, then the final ultimatum. If you do not comply, the Council will take all necessary measures to neutralize your threat. A combined fleet is being assembled as we speak. You cannot stand against the united power of galactic civilization. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. Stood on the bridge of the rising dawn, surrounded by his crew, his fleet, his people. 50,000 humans who had trusted him enough to leave everything behind. 30 days, Sarah said quietly. That's not much time. Looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that had never wanted them, at the future that he was determined to claim. "Then we better get to work," he said, "because we're not surrendering, not now, not ever." The countdown had begun. The first week after the Council's ultimatum was chaos organized into purpose, divided his forces into 3 groups, each with critical missions that could not wait. The first group, led by Thomas, returned to the cache planet to retrieve more ships and begin transferring the knowledge database to portable storage systems. Every vessel they could activate was a multiplication of their strength. Every fragment of architect knowledge was a potential advantage in the conflict to come. The second group stayed with Earth, establishing a defensive perimeter and continuing to accept volunteers. Sarah commanded this contingent, transforming the random stream of arrivals into something resembling a military organization. She implemented training protocols adapted from the architect databases, methods that seemed to accelerate learning in ways human education had never achieved. The third group, led by himself aboard the Wandering Spirit, went hunting. The architects had left caches throughout the galaxy and had extracted coordinates for 7 more locations from the database before leaving the first site. Some were closer than others. Some were more dangerous to reach, but all of them contained technology that humanity needed. The first cache was in a system controlled by the hidden beneath the surface of a moon that the pirates used as a brought a small squadron of the fastest ships, slipping through patrols using stealth systems that made their vessels invisible to conventional sensors. They found the cache exactly where the database said it would be, a smaller facility than the first, but containing something potentially more valuable: manufacturing equipment capable of producing architect-grade components from raw materials. With this technology, they could build new ships rather than simply recovering old ones. The extraction took 4 days, during which team had to fight off 2 patrol groups that stumbled onto their operation. The battles were short and one-sided, architect weapons carving through pirate ships like hot blades through soft plastic. But each engagement carried risks and pushed his people hard to complete the mission before larger forces could respond. They escaped the system just as a war fleet arrived, carrying their prizes to a rendezvous point far from any civilized space. The second cache was in the Void Territories. Had been warned about this region, the place where ships disappeared and physics broke down. The architect database confirmed that something dangerous existed there, a remnant of an ancient conflict that predated even the architect's civilization. But it also confirmed that a cache was hidden within the territories, one of the largest ever created, containing ships designed specifically for combat. If they wanted to face the Council fleet, they needed those ships. The journey into the Void Territories took 2 weeks. Normal space travel became increasingly unreliable as they penetrated deeper, forcing them to rely on navigation methods extracted from the architect knowledge base. The crew reported headaches, strange dreams, the sensation of being watched by things they couldn't see. Felt it too, a pressure against his consciousness that intensified as they drew closer to their target. The Wandering Spirit was agitated, its artificial intelligence detecting threats that its sensors couldn't identify. Something was out there, something aware and ancient and not particularly welcoming. They found the cache on a planet that shouldn't have existed, orbiting a star that burned with colors outside the normal spectrum. The facility was massive, carved into a mountain that seemed to shift and move when viewed from certain angles. And it was guarded. The things that emerged from the shadows weren't alive in any conventional sense. They were constructs of some kind, machines or entities or something in between, remnants of the conflict that the database had warned about. They attacked without warning, without communication, without any apparent motivation except destruction. Lost 3 ships and 17 people in the first assault. The architect weapons were effective, but the defenders were many, pouring out of hidden chambers in numbers that seemed endless. For the first time since finding the wandering spirit, considered retreat. Then he remembered the gateway and the first cache, the tier in reality that the architect had said contained knowledge beyond what he had already found. He remembered the feeling of standing before it, sensing that crossing it would change him in ways he couldn't predict. Maybe it was time to stop being cautious. "Cover me," he told his remaining ships. "I'm going in alone." The wandering spirit dove toward the planet's surface, weaving through enemy fire with the inhuman precision that only the architect navigation systems could achieve. Guided his ship into the facility through an opening that had been created by one of his fallen comrades, spiraling down through corridors meant for beings much larger than humans. The heart of the facility was a chamber similar to the first cache, but the gateway here was different, larger, more active, showing views that changed moment by moment, glimpses of realities beyond human comprehension. And standing before it, frozen in stasis like the architect had encountered before, was something else entirely. It wasn't an architect. It was older, different, belonging to something that had come before. The database had hinted at predecessor civilizations, beings that had risen and fallen before the architects emerged. This was one of them, preserved here for reasons couldn't guess. The moment he entered the chamber, it woke up. "You should not be here." The voice shook the walls, resonated in his bones, overwhelmed every sense with its sheer power. The being before him was vast, its consciousness expanding to fill the chamber and beyond, pressing against mind with force that threatened to crush him. "I'm taking the ships," shouted back, pushing against the pressure with everything he had. "I don't care what you are. I don't care how old you are. Humanity needs these ships, and I'm going to take them." The being paused, its pressure lessening slightly. Could feel it examining him, probing his thoughts, his memories, his determination. "The ARCHITCTS chosen," it said, something like interest replacing its initial hostility. "They seeded your kind, prepared you for inheritance." "Yes. And you have come here, to the place THEY abandoned, seeking weapons for a war you cannot win. Watch me win it." The being made a sound that might have been laughter, vast and inhuman and somehow sad. "I have watched civilizations rise and fall since before your star IGNITED. I have seen species claim they were special, chosen, destined for greatness. They all fell. They all became dust." "Maybe," admitted, "but we haven't fallen yet. And while we're still standing, we're going to fight for our place in this universe. If that's not good enough for you, then you might as well destroy me now, because I'm not leaving without those ships." Silence. The pressure against mind shifted, becoming something more like evaluation than assault. "The ARCHITCTS chose well," the being said finally. "Stubbornness, defiance, the refusal to accept inevitable defeat. These QUALITIES served THEM. Perhaps they will serve YOU." The stasis fields throughout the facility deactivated. Above them, around them, ships began to wake, their systems coming online for the first time in ages beyond counting. "Take what you need, small one. The GUARDIANS will not oppose you. But know this, the universe is vast, and there are powers within it that make the Galactic Council seem like children playing AT politics. Claim your inheritance. Build your strength, but never forget that there are always greater forces watching." The being faded, returning to whatever state of existence it had occupied before its arrival. The pressure lifted, leaving him alone in a chamber full of ancient warships. "Wandering spirit to fleet," transmitted, his voice only slightly shaky. "The opposition has been neutralized. Begin recovery operations. Let's grab everything we can and get out of here before something else shows up." They left the void territories with 93 combat vessels, enough to triple the size of their fleet. The journey back was faster than the journey in, as if the region itself was eager to see them go. 22 days had passed since the Council's ultimatum. 8 remained. The Council fleet was already assembling at a staging point in neutral space. Intelligence gathered from intercepted communications revealed its composition. Over 500 warships from all 5 Council species, carrying crews totaling more than 2 million trained soldiers. The greatest military force the current galactic civilization had ever gathered, united for the single purpose of crushing humanity's rebellion. Against them had approximately 200 architect vessels and a crew of just under 80,000 humans, most of them with less than a month of training. The numbers were not in their favor. "We can't win a straight fight," Thomas said during the command meeting on the Rising Dawn. "Even with technological superiority, they'll overwhelm us with sheer volume. For every ship we destroy, they have 10 more to take its place." "We don't need to destroy them all," replied. "We need to make the cost of fighting us unacceptable. Make them realize that victory against humanity will be so expensive that it's not worth achieving." "And how do we do that?" Sarah asked. Pulled up a display showing the Council fleet's formation, the positions of its command ships, the communication nodes that coordinated its movements. "We cut off the head." The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. While the main human fleet engaged the Council armada directly, drawing its attention and resources, a small strike team would slip behind enemy lines. They would target the command vessels, the flagships where the Council admirals directed their forces. If they could destroy or disable enough of the leadership, the Council fleet would fall into chaos. It required precise timing, split-second coordination, and pilots willing to fly into the heart of the enemy formation, knowing they probably wouldn't fly out again. Asked for volunteers, he got more than he needed. The day before the battle, walked through the fleet, visiting each ship, speaking with crews who had given up everything to be here. He saw fear in some faces, determination in others, but nowhere did he see regret. These people believed in what they were doing. They believed in humanity's right to choose its own future. The last ship he visited was the Wandering Spirit. His first architect vessel waited for him in the dock, its blue hull gleaming under the artificial lights. He placed his hand against its surface, feeling the warmth of the bond that had started everything. "Well, old friend," he said quietly, "tomorrow we find out if any of this was worth it." The ship's response came as feelings rather than words, confidence, readiness, something that might have been affection. The Wandering Spirit had been waiting millions of years for this moment, for a partner who could unlock its potential, for a cause worth fighting for. Tomorrow they would fight together. The battle began at dawn, measured by Earths for symbolic purposes. The human fleet emerged from jump space in perfect formation, 200 architect vessels arranged in a pattern that the database called the Storm's Edge, designed to maximize firepower while minimizing vulnerability. The Council fleet responded immediately, their 500 ships moving to intercept with practiced coordination. Communication channels filled with demands for surrender, threats of annihilation, offers of clemency for those who would abandon the rebel cause. Ignored them all. "All ships begin engagement," he ordered. The Storm's Edge formation swept forward, its weapons systems synchronized to fire in overlapping patterns that created zones of destruction nothing could survive. Council ships began dying, their hulls torn apart by energies that their shields couldn't deflect, their crews scattered into the vacuum before they could even understand what was hitting them. But the Council had numbers, and numbers have a quality all their own. For every ship they lost, 2 more took its place. The gaps in their formation closed as fast as they opened. The vast armada absorbed losses that would have shattered any normal fleet and kept coming. The human formation began to suffer casualties as well. Concentrated fire from multiple Council vessels could overwhelm even Architect shields, given enough time. Ships exploded, crews died, and the balance of the battle began to shift. "Strike Team, you are go for insertion," transmitted. 20 ships broke away from the main formation, led by the Wandering Spirit. They were the fastest vessels in the human fleet, piloted by crews with the strongest bonds to their ships. Their mission was to penetrate the enemy formation and destroy the command vessels before the Council's numerical superiority could grind the human fleet into dust. Push the Wandering Spirit to its limits, diving through gaps in the Council formation that closed seconds after he passed. Enemy fire surrounded him, a constant storm of energy and projectiles that his ship dodged with supernatural grace. He lost track of how many Council vessels he destroyed along the way, their deaths barely registering as he focused on his objective. The Council flagship loomed ahead, a massive construction bristling with weapons, the nerve center of the entire enemy fleet. Destroying it would throw the Council forces into confusion, buying time for the human fleet to regroup and press their advantage. But the flagship wasn't undefended. A protective screen of warships surrounded it, and they weren't the standard-issue vessels that made up the bulk of the Council fleet. These were elite units, crewed by the best soldiers each species had to offer, equipped with the most advanced technology the current galactic civilization could produce. Half of the strike team died in the first exchange of fire. Felt each loss through his bond with the fleet, connections severed as lives ended. But he didn't slow down. He couldn't. Everything depended on reaching that flagship. The Wandering Spirit took hit after hit, its shields fluctuating, its hull beginning to show stress. Poured everything into the ship systems, demanding more speed, more power, more than any vessel should be able to give. And the Wandering Spirit gave it. They burst through the defensive screen, trailing debris from damaged hull sections, their weapons already charging for the final shot. The flagship's guns were turning toward them, dozens of weapons that could destroy a small moon, all focusing on a single tiny excavator ship that shouldn't have made it this far. Fired. The Wandering Spirit's main weapon was something the database called a singularity lance. It created a temporary point of infinite density, a microscopic black hole that existed for a fraction of a second before collapsing. In that fraction of a second, it consumed everything within a several-kilometer radius. The flagship ceased to exist. So did the nearest defenders. So did a chunk of space that would take decades to stabilize. The Council fleet faltered. Commands stopped coming. Coordination broke down. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation began to drift, their crews uncertain what to do without leadership to guide them. "All human ships," Sarah's voice crackled over the fleet communication channel, "press the attack. Give them everything you've got." The Storm's Edge formation collapsed into a hunting pack, each human ship pursuing targets of opportunity as the Council fleet fell into chaos. Without unified command, the numerical superiority that had been their greatest asset became a liability. Ships got in each other's way. Friendly fire incidents. Officers made decisions based on incomplete information and conflicting priorities. The tide of battle had turned. By the time the Council fleet began to retreat, they had lost over 300 ships. The human fleet had lost 60, a painful number but far less than had feared. The survivors gathered in the void where the battle had been fought, surrounded by debris and corpses and the shattered remnants of galactic ambition. Sat in the pilot's chair of the Wandering Spirit, exhausted beyond measure, alive against all odds. His ship was battered, barely functional, but it had carried him through the storm as promised. "Council vessels are in full retreat," Thomas reported. "Pursuing forces are maintaining pressure, but we've called off the chase. No point in pushing them into a corner." "Casualties?" asked. A pause. "Approximately 12,000 dead, another 20,000 wounded." 12,000 lives. More humans than had died in space exploration since the beginning of the space age. Mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, people who had trusted with their futures. "Make sure their names are recorded," said. "Every single one. They gave their lives for humanity's freedom. That sacrifice will not be forgotten." The aftermath of the battle was almost as challenging as the battle itself. The Council had been defeated, but it had not been destroyed. 5 major civilizations still existed, still possessed resources and technology and the desire to maintain their dominance. The war wasn't over, it had just entered a new phase. Established a temporary base in unclaimed space, a staging area where the fleet could rest and repair while planning next steps. Workshops fabricated replacement parts using the manufacturing technology from the second cache. Medical facilities treated the wounded using knowledge from the architect database. Training programs continued, preparing the next generation of pilots and crews. And refugees kept coming. Word of the battle's outcome spread across the galaxy, carrying with it the impossible truth. Humans had faced the united might of galactic civilization, and won. Not through luck, not through tricks, but through superior technology and determined will. The species that everyone had dismissed as primitives had proven themselves in the most definitive way possible. Humans from every corner of settled space began making their way to fleet, not just from Earth, but from colony worlds, from space stations, from ships where they had served as second-class crew members on vessels owned by other species. They came in ones and twos at first, then in dozens, then in thousands. Other species took notice as well, though not all of them were hostile. Representatives from minor powers, species that had long been marginalized by the Council's dominance, began reaching out with tentative offers of alliance. They saw in humanity's rise a chance to improve their own position, to challenge the order that had kept them subordinate for centuries. Received these overtures cautiously. He wasn't interested in becoming what the Council had been, a dominant force imposing its will on weaker species. But allies could be useful, and the more species that stood against Council aggression, the harder it would be for them to focus their attention on humanity. 6 months after the battle, the Council formally requested negotiations. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a space station administered by a species that had maintained strict neutrality throughout galactic history. Arrived with a delegation of human leaders, including representatives from Earth's governments who had finally accepted that the old treaties were no longer relevant. The Council delegation was smaller than expected, only 2 representatives rather than the usual 5. The Endo were absent, their species having decided that further conflict with humanity wasn't worth the cost. The remaining 3 looked at with expressions that mixed resentment with grudging respect. "You have upset the balance that has maintained galactic stability the representative said. "Your actions have consequences beyond what you can understand." "The balance that kept humanity as second-class citizens," replied. "The balance that decided our fate without consulting us. That balance was never stable. It was just comfortable for those who benefited from it." "What do you want?" the representative demanded. "What will it take to end this conflict?" Leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to consider his response. The truth was, he had thought about this question constantly for months. What did humanity want? What would be enough? "Recognition," he said finally. "Full recognition of humanity as an equal member of the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that implies. No more oversight treaties. No more restrictions on our development. No more treating us like children who need to be managed." "And the technology?" the representative asked. "The architect artifacts you have recovered are ours, legitimate inheritance left specifically for species capable of using it. We won't share it, but we won't use it aggressively either. As long as our rights are respected, we have no quarrel with the Council or its members." The representatives exchanged glances, communicating in ways that couldn't fully interpret. Then they nodded slowly. "The Council will deliberate, but I believe we can reach an agreement. The alternative is continued war, and your fleet has demonstrated that such a war would be costly for everyone." "Very costly," agreed. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks, with lawyers and diplomats from every species involved hammering out details and addressing concerns. In the end, they produced a new treaty, one that recognized humanity as a sovereign civilization with control over its own development and its own space. The old order was dead. Something new was being born. 1 year after had purchased the Wandering Spirit at a disreputable auction on Gamma 7, he returned to the first cache. The fleet was stable now, humanity's position secured by technology and treaty, and the memory of what had happened when they were underestimated. But there was still unfinished business. The gateway still swirled at the center of the main chamber, showing glimpses of realities beyond normal space. Had avoided it until now, focused on immediate threats and practical concerns. But the architect's echo had said there was more through there, knowledge and power waiting to be claimed. He stood before the gateway, alone, his crew waiting on the Wandering Spirit outside. What was through there? More technology, more responsibility, the ability to transcend physical existence as the architects had done millions of years ago. Didn't know, but he had learned something in his year of fighting and building and leading. Uncertainty wasn't a reason to stop. It was a reason to keep moving forward, to keep reaching for whatever came next. He took a deep breath, thought of everyone who had trusted him, everyone who had died for the future they were building, everyone who was counting on him to keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Then he stepped through the gateway and discovered what the architects had really left behind. The universe opened before him like a flower blooming. He saw the fundamental patterns underlying reality, the rules that governed existence, the infinite possibilities that emerged from simple principles. He saw time as a dimension rather than a prison, saw space as a choice rather than a constraint. And he saw the other inheritors. They were out there, scattered across multiple realities, species that the architects had prepared in other universes, other timelines, other versions of existence. Some had risen and fallen, as the ancient being in the void territories had warned. But others had survived, had claimed their inheritances, had built civilizations beyond anything had imagined. They were watching humanity, waiting to see what they would do with the gifts they had been given. Felt the enormity of it settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about humanity's place in one galaxy. This was about their place in an infinite multiverse, about what they would contribute to a community of civilizations that spanned realities. It was overwhelming, it was terrifying. It was magnificent. He returned through the gateway with knowledge burning in his mind, understandings that would take years to process and apply. His crew saw the change in him immediately, the new weight in his eyes, the sense that he had seen things that human language couldn't describe. Sarah asked, "What happened? What did you find?" Looked at her, at the humans who had followed him through rebellion and war and everything that came after. They had proven themselves worthy of the architect's legacy. They had earned their place among the stars. Now it was time to show them what that really meant. "I found our future," he said, "all of it, and it's bigger than any of us ever dreamed." He walked toward the Wandering Spirit, toward the fleet waiting beyond the cache, toward a destiny that had been written in human genes millions of years ago. The excavator ship hummed with anticipation as he approached, ready to carry him into whatever came next. It had started with a crazy purchase at a disreputable auction, a human too stubborn to accept the limited future the galaxy had planned for him. It had grown into a revolution that had reshaped the balance of power among the stars. But that was just the beginning. Climbed aboard his ship, felt its systems come alive around him, felt the bond that connected them resonating with possibilities yet unrealized. The universe was vast, filled with wonders and dangers beyond counting. Other realities waited beyond the gateway, other species who had claimed their own inheritances, other challenges that would test humanity's worthiness. Somewhere out there, the architects were watching, or whatever the architects had become after they transcended physical existence. They had placed their bet on humanity millions of years ago, and that bet was finally paying off. Settled into the pilot's chair, surrounded by technology that responded to his thoughts, leading a people who had proven that being underestimated was a mistake. The wandering spirit lifted off, rising through the cache's ancient halls, emerging into the starlight that would guide them forward. Behind them, the gateway pulsed with promise. Ahead of them, the galaxy that they had claimed as equals stretched into infinity. And beyond that, universes upon universes, realities beyond number, a future without limits. The Council had thought humans were primitives, barely evolved beings who needed guidance and control. The pirates had thought humans were easy prey. The whole galaxy had looked at humanity and seen nothing but a species out of its depth. They had all been wrong. And they were just beginning to understand how wrong they had been. Smiled as his ship shot toward the stars, carrying the hopes of his species, the legacy of an ancient civilization, and the absolute certainty that whatever came next, humanity would face it standing tall. Because that was what humans did. They exceeded expectations. They the odds. They looked at a universe that underestimated them and said, "Watch this." And then they proved everyone wrong. The end was just another beginning. And humanity was just getting started.